with you. We've been talking about these mind-boggling numbers for broadband wireless, but today, clearly, the story is about how Reliance has made its re-entry. What have you made of this development?
Good evening. Glad to be here. In terms of the numbers, I think the numbers did shoot up a little higher than what most of us expected. I would still not qualify this as, very, very irrational. I think most of the players were fairly comfortable and did know what they were actually doing. Obviously, the fact that there were just 2 slots available, and there was one player who was fairly intent on getting a pan-India license, obviously did increase numbers to some extent. But if you compare the 3G and the BW valuations in terms of how the numbers have broken down by either the Class A, Class B, Class C circles or the metros, we broadly see around 40 to 80, about 40% of the valuation has gone primarily to the metros, about another 40% to Class A, and then the rest 18 to 20% has been between Class B and Class C. So I would say overall on expected lines, I think the total numbers are probably a little higher than what most of us had expected.
Okay, higher but not irrational. Prashant Singhal, let me put that question to you about the way that Reliance has actually made its entry back into telecom, not into voice but into data in that sense. Infotel, we just heard there from Anant Nahata that when the prices started surging as far as the auction was concerned, that's when they seriously began negotiating with Reliance. How big a surprise was this for you?
I think this is... Reliance's entry into telecom clearly is an important development, and I would think that they are bound to create history as what they did earlier with the CDMA spectrum, and I think we have to see how they would use the spectrum, whether it would be for BWA or for a different strategy. Back to you, Shireen.
But Prashant, how big a gamble is this really? And I'm not just talking about Reliance, but I'm talking about this space in general, because, we don't really have an idea, as Siddharth was just pointing out, in terms of which technologies. They're mostly in experimentative stage. The architecture really, it's not a fully mature market at this point in time. So how big a gamble is this likely to be, this entire broadband wireless space at this point in time?
So I think, to answer your question, it is a fairly big gamble. Currently, at the prices at which it has gone, if we were to look at pure play WiMAX business cases, with the nomadic mobility which is available for on WiMAX, and with primarily the use being with the computing devices, which effectively are the laptops and the desktops, the business case of most of the operators may not justify these kind of values. And remember that they still have to incur capex in order to make their business run. So I think and they are yet to be, there are some WiMAX handheld devices which are being tested, which have been rolled out in some of the countries, but it's again the development of ecosystem, and the development of those devices at a mass scale is still a big question to be answered. So this spectrum could effectively dovetail into LTE, but again LTE is at least 3 years or 3 to 4 years away. The ecosystem is yet to be developed. So I would think it's a fairly large gamble for any of the operator to pay this kind of price on the spectrum.
Rajesh, comment on this. Right from when we started these conversations on both 3G and broadband, the question that we've been repeatedly asking is, does the investment justify the possible returns in future? In the case of broadband, we've been listening to analysts saying that perhaps it may not reach the kind of numbers that 3G did, but they've been proved wrong, and now it's in fact gone even higher. Therefore, does the business case still remain, or is it going to get difficult?
I think I would agree with Prashant on the fact that, if you look at it primarily from the desktop laptop market segment and primarily a data-led proposition, I think the business cases would start looking a little tough to justify these numbers. But going back to what Prashant said, and if you look at it as this is the way to dovetail into a longer-term LTE type solution, an architecture where you start off with WiMAX, maybe even migrate to LTE as the LTE ecosystem develops. The handsets have to develop, the standards have to get formalized, and we need to have successful commercial deployments seen. There's a fair amount of pilots underway as we speak. I think then if you look at it as a longer term play where you add voice as well as a full-fledged proposition, I think even in US today, as you speak, there are devices which allow you to have WiMAX handsets where you have WiMAX for data, and you actually have a tie-up with another operator, which can allow you to have a voice solution on the handset as well. So if you look at it from a more macro, longer-term picture, I think that's where some of these operators would have actually thought the value is to actually justify these valuations. But if you look at just primarily data, I would tend to agree that it becomes a little bit more tough to justify these valuations.
Right, Prashant, so at the end of the 3G and now broadband wireless auctions, how do you actually see, or where do you actually see the main operators? What's the sort of pecking order in terms of strategy? Because if you look at the 3G auctions, we've clearly seen, dark horses emerge victorious there, companies like Aircel. Aircel also the surprise as far as the broadband wireless auction is concerned. Arcom Idea choosing to drop out of the BWA race, Bharti bagging about 4 circles. So given 3G and broadband wireless, what's the pecking order in terms of strategic vision going forward looking like in terms of the major players?
Shireen, I would think that the pecking order would not really undergo a change, at least for the next 3 years. After that, it's anybody's guess. But I think the important thing really is that what is the kind of services that people want to get into. So if one were to look at Airtel, I mean Airtel is clearly voice, data, and broadband. But if you look at some of the other operators who haven't really got the BWA spectrum, I think it's very clear that they will play the data game, but they will play it on 3G, which is handheld. They will service the laptop and the desktop market through a data card, but they would not go into a much higher level of broadband access, which is for enterprise services or for a large domestic demand, which would then be catered by the broadband wireless operators. So one would say that I would say that apart from Aircel, which clearly sees as an emerging player in voice, data plus broadband access, I mean the rest of the pecking order would remain the same, and at least for 3 years, clearly Bharti would continue to be the market leader.
All right, Rajesh, before we finally wrap this up, Prashant was just talking about the 3G versus broadband face-off. How do you actually see that panning out?
I think those handsets, in terms of handsets, I think clearly, as India tends to migrate and rollout start happening over the next year, on the handsets, you clearly see 3G as the technology of choice in addition to 2.5G, which is already available. The BWA market would largely be restricted to the desktops and laptops and primarily an enterprise play. I think what this allows them to do is to cater to the SME market in terms of allowing broadband access and providing last mile access where fixed is not a viable option. So BW will be restricted primarily to a data play unless one of these operators can either do a tie-up with another operator for a voice-led solution. Over the long haul, as we've been talking, I think LTE starts emerging as a viable alternative, but we're still probably 2 to 3 years, or at least 3 years away from reaching that point.
Rajesh, very quickly, one small question on, how do you expect players who've gotten one circle like Ticona to play this game now?
It's an interesting question. I mean, they obviously can play in that circle and offer broadband in that circle, but it doesn't make or build for a scalable, business model. So we'll have to see if they can actually look at, tying up with some of the other players as some of the regulatory reforms start happening. It gives them an option or at least a foothold in the industry. So it's more a play, I would say, if you see Ogure also, I think, ended up with one circle. I think it gives them a foothold, and then they have to build on top of this to see, as regulatory reforms happen, if they can start tying up with some of the other players to offer services on a more broader scale outside the circles they've got licenses in.
Rajesh Balaraman, Prashant Singhal, many thanks for joining us this evening with your perspective on the broadband wireless auctions that have concluded today. Well, coming up next.